Hi everyone, this is Easy AI. I got a 4-gate build for you here. And I've seen a lot of people asking, what's the best way to 4-gate? Well, I don't really know, but I came up with a really fast build that I think might be decent. A standard 4-gate should hit at about 540 to 550, although it's usually later in lower leagues. This build hits much earlier. In this example, I'll warp in at 514. This is an offline game, so there's no lag at the beginning, and that can bump the time up by a second or two. I played this build order several times and used my best time, so in reality your average warping time is probably going to be slightly later. This build's a 10-gate, but it's not the same as a Korean 4-gate. You'll have 4 stalkers total when your first warp-in is done. Some of the weaknesses of the Korean 4-gate, where you just get zealots, is that you can be kited and probes can be effective at fighting smaller breakaway numbers of zealots. With 4 early stalkers, you can't be kited, you can't get surrounded by probes, and there's no escape for his stalkers, so we can't just stall for time. Since this build cuts a lot of corners, you'll run out of resources pretty quickly, but you do get 2 full warp-ins. So you'll have 10 units at about the same time a regular 4-gate has 6 units. It's not until after the 7-minute mark that you actually have fewer units than a regular 4-gate would have at the same time. So you have a pretty good window to win the game. One catch here is that you can't afford to probe scout. Scouting late is pretty common in PvP, and a 4-gate is not exactly a reactive build, but that might still be a deal breaker for some people. I personally veto all 4-player maps, but this might not work on those, since your zealot doesn't really have a lot of time to scout. You can probe scout, but it's going to slow you down. So anyway, let's get started. So the first thing you'll notice here is that I've got these probes really well mineral stacked. These guys are all on the 4 best possible blocks. If you want to learn some tips and just some general information about mineral stacking, I've got some videos on that. But the gist of it is that these are the best 4 blocks possible. And even though they might look similar to others, like this one probably looks a lot like this one, this is actually the 4th best block, and this is dead last. This one's about 10% faster. So having your probes very well stacked and having a good technique for getting them stacked effectively without wasting a lot of time spamming the guy in the mineral block is really key to hitting the best possible timings with this build, and you can't do it otherwise. Anyways, this is a 10-gate build, so you save your chrono until after your first gate goes up. You have to wait for minerals, obviously, when your pylon's done. You only chrono 1 time. A second chrono would cost you 10 seconds on your final timing of the 4-gate. And you can get all the minerals you need without doing that. So we're going to chrono 5 times on our warp gate. Now you want to put your gateway closer to your ramp so that your stalker will be closer to your enemy's base when he pops out. I didn't do that in this game because I fail. Anyway, your stalker's going to get there a little bit later than you'd like him to, so you want to minimize that time by putting your gateway a little closer to your ramp, although not so close that you lose mining time. Just don't intentionally put it like in the back of your base or something. And the next thing you can do to minimize that is make your gate or your gas on 12, which you can afford to do without cutting probes if you mineral stack really well. If you don't, that's okay. Just put it down as early as possible and cut probes until 13, and make sure you get 2 probes on it right away. Now you want to put this probe where you're putting your core down and get the build basic structure menu open, and then just spam Y and left click. And you put your cursor just below your probe like this, but you want it still within his building range, because if he has to move forward and accelerate when he's capable of building the core, that's going to set you back by a second or so. So why do it? And you can also hotkey your probe number 1 so that you can instantly reselect him, since you'll select the core as soon as it builds and deselect the probe, and that way you can get the probe mining again faster. Also, make sure to position the probe and the structure so that the structure, when it's built, pushes the probe back toward the mining line instead of like pushing him on the opposite side of your core and your nexus and forcing him to walk all the way around, because then you just lose mining time for no reason. Now I staggered my second probe too much, putting him on gas here because I hadn't perfected the build yet, and you'll see that'll cost me at the end. You definitely want those 2 probes on gas right away, but make sure to send 1 probe who just returned from mining and then wait a second and send another one who just returned from mining, because there's no reason to have them both, waiting at the gas geyser. So it's a 15 pylon and a zealot on 16. It's totally standard. Now your 17th probe on 19 supply here is going to be your last one for a while. You don't want to build any more until your gates are done. And obviously you need to chrono warp gates as soon as it comes up. So just have that core selected and spam G and then chrono it immediately. And then from that point on you just need to be focusing on keeping chrono up above all else. Now you build your next 2 gates and then send that probe towards your enemy's base. He's going to get there a little bit early, but Ohana's a small map, so he won't get there quite as early on other maps. And if you use the next probe who builds your 4th gate, he's going to get there too late. Now you build your 4th gate as soon as humanly possible, watching your mineral count, and right as the probe is going over to build that gate, chrono again. Now you can use your first zealot to scout for cannon rushes and proxy gates, and then you can keep him out at your natural ramp for a little while to give you some advance warning of a proxy gate so you can start chronoing stuff. or you can just send him straight out to the watchtower. That's up to you. After you put your third probe on gas, right about the time your stalker is going to pop, you're going to need another chrono. Make sure to rally your stalker somewhere towards your enemy's base. Make one more probe at your nexus and put a third probe on gas. Leave them there for about 25 seconds. Once you have 90 to 100 gas, right about 4:30, you put the third probe back on minerals. Then your zealot and probe go to the enemy's main. After you move the zealot and probe toward the enemy's ramp, go back home and chrono warp gates one more time. This is a computer, so his build is a little bit funny. You can afford to engage him right now, even if it's a little bit cost ineffective. You can afford to lose the probe because your pylons are already up. And if you can keep him down there below the ramp until your stuff warps in, that's great. Just don't lose your stalker. Once your warp gate's finished transforming, you should have just enough gas for 3 stalkers. This should crush a lot of players. A lot of people just straight up die to ordinary 4 gates, and this one's hitting 20 to 30 seconds early. Other players might expect a Korean 4 gate, and so they're just prepared for zealots, and the stalkers will be a bit of a surprise. If your last gateway was late to build, that's okay. Just make sure to chrono it as soon as it finishes. That'll speed up the transformation time, and it'll allow it to catch up to your other gateways after you warp in the zealot from it. Now move a unit back to the ramp so you can warp in up top. You'll have enough for one more stalker, and you might have to wait just a bit to get the minerals for your 4th warp in. That's not really a big deal, because at this point you still have 9 units in his base when a regular 4 gate would only have 6, and your 10th unit is just a few seconds late. Now the timings for this build order are a little too exact. There's really no room to mess anything up without delaying yourself. If you don't have guys on gas right away, your stalker gets there late. If you don't put 3 guys on gas for a bit, you won't have the gas for 3 stalkers for your first warp in. If you don't mineral stack and control your probes perfectly, your last gate goes up late. So you probably won't get this exactly right, but you should still be able to hit very early, much earlier than a regular 4 gate, and that will surprise a lot of people. 4 gate defenses are generally planned around getting hit about 5:40. If they try to build sentries to force field you out, you can make them throw up a force field way too early and they won't have a second force field in time. And then they have to try to hold off a 4 gate with a sentry instead of a stalker, which is not going to go very well. They may not even have a sentry out of 5:20. A 3-stalker rush generally isn't ready in time to stop a probe from putting up a 450 pylon, although they will get a lot of free time to attack it. If one pylon's going to die, you need to replace it immediately after your first warp in, although that pylon dying will not affect your first warp in. And that's it. I'm not exactly a good player, so if you think this build is stupid and totally unviable, or if you just want to call me a noob, leave a comment.